On today's show, the Grizzlies' big three of Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. has stayed the same, but the supporting cast has changed a lot. What differences to expect this season out of Memphis? And is Zach Edey ready for a big role? It's all coming up on today's Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you actually place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Head on over there. Check out all the different odds available to you, like different season awards, different division winners, conference winners, all that stuff, or just the outright Super Bowl favorites. Right now, the Chiefs plus 500 to win it all. Right behind them, the 49ers plus 650, the Ravens plus 750, the Lions plus 950, and then the Houston Texans in 5th place at plus 1,000 to win the Super Bowl this season. So for all those odds and so much more, head on over to FanDuel.com. And joining us now is the host of Locked On Grizzlies, Joe Mullinax. You can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Grizzlies. And Joe, I feel like the Grizzlies this season are one of the teams in the NBA that have maybe the highest degree of like maybe some potential volatility here in what their top end possibilities are this season, top end outcomes, as well as just how, I don't want to say how bad things could look, but maybe some lower end outcomes with this team. A lot of pundits, some projections have the Grizzlies, crashing the party in the Western Conference, storming back into the top of the standings, and deservedly so. When they were healthy a couple years ago, couple seasons ago, they were the back-to-back 2 seed for a couple seasons there, and looked like one of the, juggernauts in the Western Conference. But this is also a very different Grizzlies team coming back this season. Obviously, health permitting up and down the roster, they've still got the big three of Ja, Triple J, and Desmond Bane. But a lot of the supporting cast is now a little bit different, especially two kind of significant contributors in Zach Edey and Marcus Smart, the guys kind of projecting to be heavy hitters in the starting lineup, whatnot. How different do you expect this Grizzlies team to look, especially with those two guys kind of, playing starters roles, eating up a significant chunk of minutes?
Filling in the roles that were played by current Houston Rockets, right? Steven Adams and Dillon Brooks.
I knew we'd get there eventually.
Well, I'm in space, right? As you can clearly tell, I'm riding the Rockets as we speak. I think that the reason for the volatility is it starts at the top, right? Ja Morant is by definition at this point volatile. Doesn't mean he's bad. I think that Nike clearly thinks he's going to be fine, right? There's been a massive ad campaign launched for the Ja 2s. They don't do that for guys that they're worried about. There's literally millions upon millions of dollars invested. And I think from all that I've heard and all that others have been talking about in Memphis, Ja is going to be fine. However he learned his lesson, it seems to have been learned, if it needed to be learned, depending on your perspective. And I think that kind of stuff I wouldn't worry about any longer. Health-wise, as Ja Morant literally is out as we speak due to an ankle injury, and Jaren Jackson Jr. also currently out with some hamstring soreness. Part of that, the biggest part, being that it's preseason and who really cares, aside from you and I and the folks that are checking out this episode. Beyond that, I think that's the fair question. Can this team stay healthy? If they are healthy, there's no way they're not a top 6 team in the Western Conference, in my opinion, because their top 3 of Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. is that good. Marcus Smart being that 4th man, kind of filling that Dillon Brooks role. When they played together last year, they were 6-3. That's important to understand. They were on pace to catch and get into the play-in conversation, and nobody would have wanted to play the Memphis Grizzlies if they had gotten there before Ja Morant hurt his shoulder, and that was that for the year. I think that it's a lot riding on Zach Edey in particular. That's a fair thing to point out. The Grizzlies offense has looked different. in the preseason. Sometimes coaches and teams are like, oh, our offense is going to be so fun. Just you wait. And it looks exactly the same. That was the Grizzlies last year, to be honest with you. Ja Morant at the top of the key, pick and roll, guys camp out on the perimeter, waiting for guys to crash. That was what they were doing. That is not what the Memphis Grizzlies are doing right now. They're doing a lot more cutting. They're doing a lot more ball movement. It's resulted in some pass-happy, almost two pass-happy moments, lots of turnovers. But it's one of those things that I think will pay dividends down the road as they diversify their offense. So it starts with Morant. And it also depends on how these pieces like Edey are able to align within this new offensive scheme. The defense is going to be a top 10 defense, perhaps even top 5 if Jaren and Edey can click early on. The key is going to be how much better can this offense get, which has been the Achilles heel of the Grizzlies, even when they were good a couple of years ago. That is going to be the most important piece of determining Memphis's success beyond just simple health.
How big of a role, because again, literally one of the biggest pieces for the Grizzlies this season, Zach Edey, how big of a role should we expect to see him play this season? Because he's coming in as a rookie. He seems like he's ready to contribute at a high level, but he is a rookie, right? There's also maybe some lineup versatility that you have there with playing Triple J some minutes at the 5, maybe Brandon Clarke some minutes there. Like, how do you envision Taylor Jenkins kind of trying to balance all this out?
They're trying to figure that out themselves. My co-host, Michael Cole, over there, he writes for the Commercial Appeal. He's the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. He's written about some of the growing pains of that, and that's a fun pun considering Zach Edey is a massive human being. He is kind of in that I'm not the best player on the planet anymore like he was at the college basketball level the last 2 years. And that's not hyperbole. For 2 years, he was the National Player of the Year. So I think it's fair to say he was the best player in college basketball. He's not that, but the Grizzlies don't need him to be that. And I think that's where it's that weird in between, to paraphrase Britney Spears' I'm not a girl, not yet a woman. I'm not an all-star, yet I'm not a player that's the worst draft pick in history, like some have said. They don't need him to be the guy that he was at Purdue. That's not what they need. They need him to be an elite role player. DeMichael talks about that all the time. Can he set screens? Can he roll to the basket and be efficient? He has great hands. Can he, when he has a mismatch, take advantage of it? I think the clear, obvious answer to that is yes, from watching him in college. When he gets double teamed against bench units, which will happen, can he make a pass to the open shooter, the open cutter backside? He had 4 assists against the Charlotte Hornets this past weekend. That was huge to me because that was not something that he was asked to do at Purdue very often, was be a passer, a facilitator of offense. If he can grow in that way throughout the year, again, if the Grizzlies start 11-11, I'm not going to panic, and nor should you, nor should anybody. They are investing pretty clearly and growing as the season goes on. They want to be playing their best basketball in April. The one thing that's been a mild concern for me with Zach Edey, the Grizzlies play really fast, as most people know if you've watched Memphis the last few years. That hasn't changed. Zach Edey played every minute of the national championship game. I did not think conditioning would be a concern. The NBA speed is vastly different, obviously, from college basketball, and he's been winded a couple of times. How much of that is him just getting his feet under him in the NBA level? That's something to keep an eye on early on. He's not out of shape. He's lost 10 pounds, so he's not 300 anymore. He's 290. He's lean, but it's a different speed, obviously, when you're playing at the National Basketball Association level.
You likened a moment ago Marcus Smart to kind of, the Dillon Brooks replacement essentially for this new look version of the Memphis Grizzlies. Are there any, obviously Marcus Smart is an elite defensive piece. He embodies kind of that heart and soul kind of mentality of whatever team he's on, whether it's with the Celtics or now with the Grizzlies. I'm sure Grizzlies fans are going to, if they haven't already, they're going to come to love Marcus Smart, especially on a Grizzlies team that's actually playing for something near the end of the season, knock on wood, hopefully. But
fingers crossed,
right? But are there any concerns with a backcourt of Marcus Smart, Ja Morant from a size component? Because you actually kind of look at the dichotomy between a front court of Zach Edey, Triple J, and then a backcourt of Ja Morant, Marcus Smart. This might be like the biggest height difference between front court and backcourt in the entire NBA.
And imagine if Yuki, my boy Yuki, makes the team at the end of the Grizzlies bench right now. 5'8" player standing next to Zach Edey is always fun to see in these preseason games. He'll probably be on the G League team. But anyway, I think that the size doesn't concern me as much. People talk about wingspan. Marcus Smart has defended 4s and 5s throughout his career. Not something that maybe as he gets older you want him to do all the time, but I do think he has the physical ability to do it. And perhaps more importantly, he has the mentality to do it. I like Marcus Smart on this roster, and I'll go back to Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks, and I've said this to you, I've said this numerous times over at Locked On Grizzlies. Anybody that's mad at Dillon Brooks doesn't understand that he was just being himself. It's like being mad at a dog that barks or a cat that meows or a duck that quacks. This is somebody who, when he was at Oregon, speaking of the Ducks, was asked to do more than he ever should have been asked to do. Same thing in his rookie season. He was asked to do more than he was ever should have been asked to do. He's defending LeBron James and Kevin Durant as a second-round pick during that terrible Grizzlies season. So when he saw himself as a cornerstone piece, even though he wasn't that, we shouldn't be surprised. Same thing with Marcus Smart in Boston. We heard the Jays having issues with Smart and who's the real leader of the team and all those sorts of things. Dillon and Marcus are both in better places now. Brooks does not expect to be a cornerstone for the Houston Rockets because that's not why he went there. That isn't his experience. Same thing with Marcus Smart. This is Ja Morant's team. To a lesser extent, it's Desmond Bane's team. It's Jaren Jackson Jr.'s team. Marcus Smart can be a good defender, hit open threes, be a leader, but he doesn't have to go above and beyond what should be expected of him at this stage of his career, and that gives me reason for optimism.
How good will the Grizzlies be this upcoming season? Is Zach Edey ready for a big role within the Grizzlies' offensive and defensive schemes? You're going to have us covered for all that and so much more over at Locked On Grizzlies. Joe, thanks for stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Always happy to be with you, buddy.